Hello, I'm Eric Corman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters, and the parent of a fifth grade son in the public school system who needs special education services. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to build a brighter future for every Washington student. Our website is educationvoters.org. We believe that education is a tool for justice. One of the systems that perpetrate racial injustice experienced by communities of color is our schools. We believe every child deserves an excellent public education that provides an equal opportunity for success. In order to achieve this, we must pursue radical change in our school systems for equity, justice, and liberation. We must build schools and systems that honor the humanity in every student. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series 7 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's LEVinar features superintendents from across Washington state on racial equity and going back to school. As plans for the 2020-21 school year are being finalized, school districts across Washington state are focusing on racial equity while developing updated learning plans, and students, parents, and educators are trying to navigate new systems and expectations. We are honored to have Highline Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Susan Enfield, Kent School District Superintendent Dr. Calvin Watts, Northshore School District Superintendent Dr. Michelle Reid, Bellingham Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Greg Baker, Kennewick School District Superintendent Dr. Traci Pierce, and Davenport School District Superintendent Jim Kowalkowski. They will share how racial equity is being addressed during this historic time, describe what school will look like in their districts for the start of the 2020-2021 school year, outline what kinds of support school districts in Washington state need from the state right now as the school year gets underway, and they will answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function, which you're welcome to use to check in with each other, or send it to info@educationvoters.org. Welcome, Dr. Enfield, Dr. Baker, Dr. Watts, Dr. Reid, Dr. Pierce, and Superintendent Kowalkowski. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and I appreciate everything you do for students in Washington state. I would like to start with the first question about racial equity. It is front and center right now, and I'm curious what your districts are doing right now to address racial equity. Dr. Enfield, how about if we start with you?
Sure. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, and Eric, thanks for hosting. So we are doing quite a bit. Our school board has been very public in saying that this is going to be a priority for their leadership and for our district moving forward. So we are in the process right now of determining what that means for us as a system. 2 weeks from today, we will be hosting our 3rd annual equity symposium for all staff. The focus of that symposium this year will be on how we are embarking on this journey to becoming an anti-racist school system and organization, which is obviously going to be a work in progress for some time. We do have as part of our equity policy a procedure around instruction around race and identity. And with the expectation that by 2023, all of our schools are phasing in very explicit instruction on race and identity. And we have standards that we've adopted from teachingtolerance.org that guide us in that work. So I would say that it's happening at multiple levels, at the board level, the district level, and the school level. And then, of course, really I think we can always do a better job of listening to, learning from, and engaging with our communities, our families, our students, and our broader community on what solutions they see and how we can better partner to truly be anti-racist school systems.
Great, thank you, Dr. Enfield. Dr. Pierce, what's happening in Kennewick?
Great, well, thank you. It's great to be here this afternoon. And in Kennewick, so I joined the Kennewick School District last year and became superintendent in January. And so during my first few months, I've had the great opportunity to meet with groups of stakeholders, parents, community members, students, staff, and receive lots of great feedback about what the district's doing well and what the district can do better. All of that information has gone into informing a new strategic plan for the district. And so that will be launched officially this fall. And there's a strong equity theme throughout the whole strategic plan. And on July 29th, our board issued a proclamation, an equity-focused proclamation that includes all of our district stance on anti-racism, commitment to equity, and really renewing efforts in that area, which includes the formation of a district equity team. So that work is just beginning to get underway, and that group is going to help us as a district move forward with our strategic plan and look at all aspects of our district, from recruiting and hiring and retaining staff to our outcomes for students and what work we can do there to ensure high outcomes for all students, to all aspects of our district. So it's a very exciting time to be in Kennewick, and a lot of great work that is being renewed and re-energized at this time.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Pierce. Dr. Baker, what's happening in Bellingham? Let's go up to Whatcom County.
Yeah, some similar themes as my colleague shared. Our board a year ago, like many other districts, created an equity policy that really frames and highlights and sets a charge to the superintendent, myself, and his staff on some specifics that we need to be able to do around race and equity. And so from, as Susan said, from a leadership level at a high level, the importance is shared with our community. Similar to what Traci and others said, the diversity of our staff is always a challenge, and to make sure that within our entire organization, our staff reflects our community. And so how are we attracting and retaining a diverse work group, and working with other districts like Highline and Western? One of our strategies is looking at some of our other employee groups, such as our paraprofessionals and staff that are more diverse in other job groups, and helping train them to become teachers and principals and administrators through our ranks. And then professional development is one that we're doubling down on in terms of how you engage all of our staff in strong professional development around this. And I think I just end by saying, you know, over these last few months, the power of voice, whether it's, as some folks just said, the power of listening to our students and our community, but also the power of leadership. And I think each of us, you know, have found ourselves in a position of needing to articulate to our community what our values are and our beliefs, and how we're making sense of some of this, what's going around the world. And that can be a tough position to put ourselves in, but that's what is required. And so I find myself spending a lot of the time communicating out how I view and how I'm seeing things, and what that means with whether that's police officers, et cetera. And you're putting yourself out on the line a little bit that not everybody agrees with, and has some real tension. So I think how as a leader you navigate that and bring your community along in this, and knowing that there's different viewpoints is a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Baker. We'll go to Superintendent Kowalkowski, then Dr. Watts, and then Dr. Reid. Superintendent Kowalkowski, what does it look like for racial equity in a small district like yours? You've got, what, 500 students, and you're 35 miles west of Spokane. So it's a different experience, I'm sure.
It's a much different experience, and I'm sure we're the most least racially diverse school district compared to all the other folks on this webinar. But that's also an opportunity to help educate kids and learn. We had plans to really look into our social studies curriculum, and with a different equity lens, we've kind of put that on hold initially, because our focus right now is just hopefully getting our reopening plans going, but we will revisit that certainly. The thing we try and do, our motto is every kid, every day, and we don't give up on kids. It doesn't matter background of kids, income that they have in their families, if they're way behind on credits, or if they're going to an Ivy League school. It doesn't matter. It all matters, but we don't give up on kids. And we were fortunate. We received a Title I National Distinguished Award last year, and also a Blue Ribbon School Award. We sent different teams to Washington, D.C. to collect those awards. And then we also had Kathy Morse Rogers, a congresswoman from our area, come and talk to our kids. And I would love to have her back with this topic, because it would be really interesting to hear her perspective and our kids. A lot of our diversity actually comes from we have a really strong foreign exchange student program. And we've learned a lot from different cultures, and that has just been wonderful. We're hoping to be able to continue that. I've tried to, as a school leader, work like on grading issues with teachers. I was administrator in Ferndale years ago. That's just north of Bellingham, and we served the Lummi Indian reservation, many of their students, and I learned a lot about appreciation of different cultures and time. Maybe should an assignment be on time? Is that most important, or should the quality be most important? And great discussions, and I argue it's the quality. Yes, we have deadlines, but those perspectives are really, really important. So those are things we're trying to. This is a challenging part of the state, because in certain regions, folks want to break off and create their own third state of liberty. So we have to work through all of that, but to try and treat every kid, every person we come in contact with, grace and dignity. I think that's the most important.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Watts, what's happening in Kent?
Absolutely. Thank you again for having us, and appreciate the opportunity to lead in Kent School District beginning year 6. And I'd like to share what we often speak to in Kent is really about defining terms. And we had to make sure that there was a shared understanding of what racial equity meant to us. And so as we reflected upon our policies, our procedures, our practices, from the boardroom to the classroom to the living room, our reality became this, that we defined and described racial equity as that when our policies and our procedures and practices are working well, when we do this work well, the race of any student will no longer serve as a primary predictor of student success or non-success. And the reality is that we are seeing improved outcomes in many ways. And as we all know, I think we would share the same belief, there is much room for improvement. We adopted as a board in March of 2017 our race and equity policy to guide our work, to ensure that our systems and structures were aligning with and through an equity lens, to make sure that all students, staff, and families were able to receive the resources that they needed when they needed. One example of true equity and race equity in practice has to do with our reopening plan. I will say that in the midst of the opportunity to continue serving in Kent, one of the outliers was our reopening plan decision to reopen in full remote learning mode. It was one of the first times that I recall that our full board, each one of our 8 labor partners in our community, all breathed a collective sigh of relief because they were actually anxious about starting school in any other way. We had 108 members of our school community, from PTSA members to students to building administrators, central admin, who worked in several work groups, and we met on a regular basis. We actually even invoked Dr. Pedro Nagara's Reopening Schools with a Focus on Equity as one of our learning opportunities and task force work groups. I also share our work in racial equity extends to our most important task, our priority and our core business of teaching and learning. In a couple of weeks, we will conduct our 2nd annual signature learning event, known as TALK, which stands for Teaching and Learning in Kent. We've patterned it after a national conference style. We'll have keynote speakers, Dr. Ivory Polson. Last year, Dr. Jeff Andrade Duncan from the Oakland area, focused on race and racial equity. We'll continue this work and until it's done, and as we know, this work is never done. So proud to serve and happy to share just a little bit about what's happening in Kent School District.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Watts. And Dr. Reid, your district straddles both King and Snohomish counties. So I know it's, again, a little different experience where you are.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and good afternoon. Very much like my colleagues, we've been focused on this topic for several years now, honestly. And this week, our administrative retreat is focused on this topic as well. And our Racial and Educational Justice Department has instructed really meaningful professional development that be required of all staff prior to school opening. And we're laying out those details for our community as well. Kenneth Jones often talks about not creating a situation where you're spending all your time problem solving, but rather creating a really clear vision of your preferred future state. Because if we go about this really hard work as a problem solving venture, we will never run out of problems to remove. So what we're working really hard to do is create this vision of our preferred future state. This winter, we created an equity and pedagogy position to work with ethnic studies, K-12 in our district, and look at developmentally appropriate mini lessons and thoughtful conversation starters, et cetera, throughout our system in a really, I think, developmentally appropriate way. But as I think about opening school online, and like my colleagues, we are as well, it's such an opportunity as we curate instructional material from online, right? To take a look at everything we're teaching and how we're teaching it. And as we continue to put this emphasis on community and community building, it's also an opportunity for us to select materials that we think fit within this larger vision of a racially just educational system. So I'd like to use just my last minute and just share that we were this morning reviewing an excerpt from Glenn Singleton's book in 2006, Courageous Conversations About Race. And in thinking about this vision of a preferred future state, I want to just share a quote. When students graduate, they exit secure in their knowledge and their abilities. They have not been sheltered, coddled, and limited. They have been pushed to excel beyond their own imagination and expectations. Education has fulfilled its mandate with these students, and they are prepared to attain all their heart desires. We believe that all children deserve nothing less when they go to school each day. So we will think we've gotten there when we can meet that vision. So thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Reid. And you talked about reopening. I'd like to move into that, what your reopening plans look like for the 2021 school year. And while you describe that, I'd also like to know if there's anything that your district needs from the state in terms of resources, anything that we as advocates should advocate for. In the pre-discussion before we started the webinar, there was discussion about transportation, for example, and I'm sure there's other things. Dr. Baker, I'd like to start with you. What does the start of the 2020-21 school year look like in Bellingham? And then what do you need from the state?
Well, I'll share a couple pieces because we could all go on for a long time on this. There's so many pieces. I'd say at one level, we've borrowed from a lot of colleagues on here, from Michelle and her district, the concept of different phases we've embraced. And so phase one for us is everybody remote. And as soon as we can go to phase two with some of our highest need students, great. Phase three with our early learners, phase four, a cohort model, and then phase five, fully open. So we've tried to set the stage of coming back when we can safely do so. And from Susan and Highline, we borrowed some of how they're looking at the day. We're trying to articulate to our families. Last spring, for probably many of us, we got a lot of, it wasn't the great model, and a real desire for more synchronous live interaction, where we were pretty cautious with that for really an equity lens piece. So we've now created more of a school day structure where you're going to check in the morning, have a day, not online all day, but how you have moments where you're learning. And Susan's district did a nice job of kind of giving, like, here's what the day could look like. So we've been trying to do that. But a real big challenge of that then creates the counter challenge of families that say, my students can't be online live from 8 to 2:30. I have a job and I have that. And the childcare piece just emerges right there as a challenge. So I'd say that a challenge I'll throw out there is childcare. We're not a nation that has embraced childcare as a universal service. Other countries do have that, and they're in a different place. We've had moments in our country, I think World War II, where the government has stepped up, and I think that's the need that we're facing, and I'm sure all of us are. If everyone's home and we even provide synchronous learning like families want, the childcare aspect is just daunting, and the emotions and the pain of families trying to figure out what this means is immense. So those are a few thoughts to get us going.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Baker. Let's move over to Eastern Washington and Kennewick. Dr. Pierce, what does the school year look like over there, and what do you need from the state?
Sure. So like everyone, we're prioritizing the health and safety of our students and staff as we reopen And we're following the recommendations of our local health department, which is Benton Franklin Health Department. So Benton Franklin Health District. So they recommended that schools don't open for in-person instruction beginning September 1st. So we've made the decision not to open for in-person instruction September 1st, and we'll remain in remote learning at least for the month of September. And then we'll, looking at the community transmission rates and data, make a determination about what to do moving forward. So for the year, we've adopted 3 learning models. We have a new online learning academy that we are developing, and we want to provide that as an option for families who just aren't comfortable sending their children back to school for any in-person learning during the year. Then we're beginning in remote learning, and that is a new and improved version of the continuous distance learning that we did in the spring. It will be, like with everyone, a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning. It's a full day of learning for students and meets all the basic ed requirements. We've got Chromebooks issued or in the process of being issued for all students grades 3 through 12. And we have iPads for our K2 learners on order. We're moving toward having everyone have a device. And the third learning model is the hybrid learning model, which is a blend of face-to-face, in-person instruction and remote. And so when we can safely move to hybrid learning, we'll have an AABB schedule where we'll have half of the students coming on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then half of the students coming on Thursdays and Fridays with the off days. They're not off, but they're remote learning on the days that they're not in person. So that's basically our reopening plan. Even as we open though in remote learning, we're looking to serve the students who can benefit the most from some in-person remote learning assistance. So we're looking at what we call our Tier 3 special education students, having in-person learning occurring during this, what we're calling kind of our phase 1.5. That's what we're in here in Benton County. And also on-site learning supports for other groups of students who can benefit the most. So one quick thing, and then I'll wrap up. We're looking at potentially using our buses to go out in the morning to run their stops, to deliver meals, and potentially any learning resources, especially for our younger students, especially until we can secure all the iPads that we've got on order, and pick up those students who would then potentially come, small groups of students, to receive remote learning instruction on site. So to your question about what do we need, one of the big issues is with transportation funding and the model being based on ridership. As many districts across the state are opening in a remote learning model, we're not going to have much ridership, but we still have very good use for those buses and for our bus drivers to meet the needs of our students and families. So to ensure that we have funding to sustain that model is critically important. And I know many of us are in conversation with our legislators. I've been talking with our local legislators here, and it's those kind of things that we just need some support and assistance with.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pierce. We'll move over to Kent and then to Davenport, then to Northshore, and we'll wrap up with Dr. Enfield and Highline. So Dr. Watts, you were the first district to announce all remote learning in the fall, at least on the Western Washington side. What does reopening look like for you? Or at least,
I appreciate that. Yes, thank you. The decision was, I think as my colleagues have already shared, was based on science, based on prioritizing our students, staff, and families' safety, health, and wellness. And to be quite frank, it was a decision that was based on 3 viable options, but there really was only one choice. And so with that, we plan to begin 2021 in remote learning, our goal, and we are working towards that to ensure that we are not replicating our building the plane as we were flying in March. We are now planning for high quality and consistently provided online learning and instruction, more explicit expectations and accountability for those instruction as well as those assignments that we're providing for our students to learn, as well as our professional development for our teaching and support staff. It will look like daily lessons posted on Friday before the following week in Canvas. Canvas will be our learning management system choice. This will be for all students, for all grades, for our asynchronous and for our synchronous instruction. We will be utilizing Microsoft Teams in support of synchronous instruction. On generally speaking, 3 to 4 hours of instruction will take place, both live and self-paced, with our students virtually on a daily basis. That includes intervention, enrichment, use of our specialists, direct instruction, obviously guided practice, and opportunities for independent work and support. There will be opportunities for self-paced for 2 to 3 hours on a daily basis. That would include examples such as pre-recorded lessons, 30 minutes on average of independent reading, journal writing, ongoing practice, garden variety instructional practices that we would expect of all of our students as they learn and achieve at increasingly higher levels. Social emotional learning, we know, is a priority for us all as legislated. The reality is we have to make sure that our students are present, right? The greatest ability for our students to achieve is availability. We want to make sure that they're present on each and every day. So attendance obviously will be taken daily. We'll have our established routines, using that class meeting time at the very beginning of our classes to engage and enrich and create viable, meaningful relationships to the extent that we can in this two-dimensional environment. But the reality is we will do our very best to replicate what we know is the best form of instruction, which is face-to-face, and we'll be following health and safety guidelines. When safe to do so, we will plan to be in remote learning status through the first quarter, through approximately October 30th, unless we have reason to change that and move towards the examples, as we've heard before, of hybrid learning models. I will say this to close. Our goal is to make sure that professional learning opportunities, again, are high quality and ongoing, and that more learning opportunities, not just for our students and not just for our staff. We've also created a parent university, of course, essentially a family tech academy to provide. And we heard early and often from our families who may be knowledgeable about technology, but not necessarily a technology that's exclusive to teaching and learning. So we'll have opportunities for ongoing support and guidance to ensure that we have as seamless a transition to this remote learning model to begin 2021.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Watts. I appreciate that. Superintendent Kowalkowski, what does the year look like in Davenport?
I just want to make a quick comment. I'm humbled by these school leaders. They're all strong messengers of hope. And I see that as our main purpose, to provide hope to our students and to our communities. And it's probably the most difficult job right now. I've been a superintendent over 20 years. This is the hardest because of the ongoing situation, but we're going to get through and provide hope. Well, Lincoln County is, again, just west of Spokane. We had very few cases. When Dr. Pierce talked about delivering food, we did that last spring. All our buses were running. It's interesting, one of our state senators from this side didn't even know. He said, "Oh, you're saving all kinds of money." And I said, "No, we're running buses every day." "Oh, what are you doing?" "We're delivering meals. We're delivering thumb drives. We're delivering Chromebooks. We're picking up packets. We're delivering books, letters." We had several teachers writing letters back and forth. It was wonderful. So we made it the best that we could. But 2 weeks ago, I would have said we're starting, because again, we're small, very few cases. We were going to go with a shortened day, 8 to 2. Friday's remote learning day. We were able to get all of our kids a Chromebook thanks to our community passing the capital projects levy. But many of our kids don't have remote access. So we were doing hotspots. We were also opening up parking lots. We're going to, no matter what, we're going to open up part of the school and do cafes because we've got a lot of parents and kids that can't afford it or don't have the broadband access, or both. So we've got great internet schools. So we're going to find a way. I've told parents, usually at football games, I'm there helping supervise home or away. Friday nights, I may be in the school opening up for, again, small groups of kids to come in with their parents if that's allowed with their health department. But getting back to your question, things have changed since our counts have gone up. We've had at least one case in the last 14 days, each day of the last 14 days, which is the new metric. We have less than 12,000 people in our county. So each case is really a multiple of 10 because it's 100,000. They're doing it with 100,000 as a cohort. So we are above on the decision tree, we're above 75. So we are regrouping. We're working closely with the health department. They're allowing us to bring in small groups of students, no more than 10, with a staff member. That's what we're going to do. They'll stay in that cohort for that morning session and afternoon. We're going to run extra buses. We're going to have buses no more than 20 kids. Our drivers are, all of them except one, are over age 65. We want to protect them. And that's what we're going to do. We're small enough we can do that. And it's kind of a week by week with our health department. Again, a partial day, couple hours. Several of our teachers last spring said, if we could just see the kids a little bit, I could get them turned around. And we were able to do a little bit, but not much. So that's what we're gonna try and do. As all the superintendents know, it's changed, things can change quite a bit. But we have a orange, which is the plan I just talked about, small cohorts in the morning and afternoon. We will provide breakfast and lunch with just grab and go for all kids. And then we can go back to yellow, which is half a day, particularly with K-5. And then probably every other day an A-B schedule with our middle school, high school. And then down to green would be, we can open up pretty fully with still doing all of the 6-foot separation and face mask and all that. The thing that I would love most, well, two things from all the community folks that are listening to this webinar is, please, we have to do this with our communities and our families and our kids. We have to show grace and compassion and understanding. Please give your local school district the same grace, understanding, and compassion as we work through this. We want your kids to come back. We want to be able to help them. I think, as Dr. Watt said, it's the relationships, it's the connections with kids. That's why we do in-learning person so well. But please help us with that. And then for the legislature and even for community people, what was talked about earlier, I think Dr. Price mentioned it, or Dr. Pierce mentioned it, the helping with funding for transportation, because our buses are going to be busy. If it's not delivering kids, it's going to be small groups of kids, special needs kids perhaps, or maybe even parents bringing them in for some conferences and delivering materials. I could talk a lot more, but Greg said I talk too much, so I'm going to shut it off.
Thank you, Superintendent Kowalkowski. Appreciate that. Dr. Reid, what does school look like in Northshore moving forward? And since you were the first district to go 100% online back in the spring, and what do you need at this time?
Thank you, Eric. I went ahead and just put a link to our website that describes our Northshore Learns 3.0 learning schedule. So if I put it in the chat, if folks want to log in, they can see the schedules, and they're very similar to what my colleagues have already shared. What was clear to us is that with our community transmission rate as high as it is in Washington State right now, we really have no choice but to go online at this time. All the other countries around the world who have taken the step of gradually reopening their schools had a much lower community transmission rate prior to making those decisions. The recent Wall Street Journal article actually does a grid graph that's really thoughtful, that lays out the actual, the numbers per 100,000, and we're way over the top on those numbers per 100,000. So we have to be really thoughtful about that, and I think each of us is, to connect our first topic around educational justice to this topic. We, as Greg mentioned, took a 6-staged approach. We wanted to make sure that our community saw the options of everybody online and at home and everybody physically in school. And then we have 4 stages in between. We want to make sure we taught those stages to our community at a time when we're not in crisis, so that as we move through the year, we understand where we're headed. There'll be some lead time to move up the continuum, and there may not be lead time if we have to step back. Due to the health concerns. I want to also indicate that the transportation topic, I think that everyone has already talked about, is critical for several reasons. As Jim pointed out, continuing to uplift that beacon of hope is so important. And if at such time during the course of the year we're able to pivot to more in-person classes, if we don't have bus drivers, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to transport students. With close to 24,000 students in Northshore and 60% of our drivers in that high risk category, if we then exacerbate that situation with pulling or withdrawing transportation funding, thereby potentially furloughing drivers, many of them are going to find other work, I believe, at this point, and we won't allow us to pivot back to in-person school if we make those decisions. In some ways, I can understand why it might be a short-term decision in terms of monies that seem available, but the long-term consequence is really tantamount to saying we're going to be virtual school all year. because the reliability or adaptability of the system will be gravely damaged if we lose those transportation monies. So I really want to encourage our legislators to think of that long-term possibility, and hopefully it's not so long-term, right? Hopefully mid-year we'll be able to start some serious physical teaching and learning on site, but we'll need our transportation people, and to recruit, hire, and train new folks at such time that funding might come back really would delay the possibility of doing that in any meaningful way. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Dr. Reid. Dr. Enfield, what does the start of school look like in the Highline district, and what do you need from the state and the community?
Sure. So like my colleagues, we're in full distance learning, certainly not the start to the school year that any of us wanted, but simply the only responsible decision that we could have made given the transmission rates, the positive test case rates. As I said to someone actually I said it in my blog for you all, Eric, from a science-based perspective, it was a no-brainer of a decision. From a heart perspective of what we know is good for kids and families, it was the hardest decision I had to make, right? So, I mean, it's just one of those things, and I know my colleagues share that. Most of the superintendents, no, all of the superintendents I call my friends and colleagues, have had a long-standing commitment to equity. That's not new. In Highline, we have our Highline promise to know every student by name, strength, and needs. They graduate prepared for the future they choose. That is our very clear-cut stake in the ground on equity. And it's more important than ever before. If we aren't connecting with kids, we are going to lose them. We are going to lose them in frighteningly high rates. And so what we have been trying to do as we use our equity lens through all the decisions that we're making around reopening is also looking at opportunities that we can seize out of this moment. So for example, since we will be in distance learning, we want to make sure that every student in Highline Public Schools has a single adult that is checking in with them on a weekly basis and building that relationship and making sure. So this notion of name, strength, and need, we want to once and for all operationalize it, systematize it, so that no child is allowed to go invisible while we're in this distance learning, and once we come back into hybrid learning as well. So I think that how we're looking at opportunities to make sure that every child is connected, and to make sure that every child truly has what they need. So what do we need? Well, we need a lot. And I think what I would first say to everyone who's with us today and more is we, and I'm making it the collective we, need to make sure that we are exerting the pressure where the pressure needs to be. You know, I've seen some questions here around what are districts doing around childcare. I have to be honest with you. Does it pain me? And am I doing everything I can to partner with childcare to help our families? Yes, that should not be placed on our districts. As Greg said, we have a national child care crisis. We don't have a statewide solution. We don't have a national solution. And frankly, it just is not realistic to say that the 295 districts in Washington state are individually or collectively going to solve that problem. It is bigger than we are. Now, we can be part of that solution. And I'm sure, like my colleagues who are with me today, we are partnering with child care providers in the area. We are going to be providing child care in some of our buildings, partnering with some of our providers, but it's not going to meet the need. It's bigger than we are. It's bigger than school districts. So that's one thing. I think we really do have to have a national solution around childcare. The next thing is the fundamental equity sort of issue of our day right now when it comes to access is broadband access. We estimate that we still have likely, hundreds, maybe close to 1,000, 1,500 families in Highline that do not have reliable home internet access. Without home internet access, children will not be going to school. Let's just be loud and clear. Children will not be going to school this fall if they cannot log on to connect with their teachers, their classmates, and access their learning. And so the notion that broadband, that internet should be a utility is something that we have to push for. We're fortunate that some of our city partners are using some of their CARES dollars to help with that. Our local Highline Schools Foundation is actually fundraising. People in the community can donate $140 to pay for a year's worth of internet for a family who needs it. That is the modern day equivalent of a bake sale. That is not a nationwide solution to connecting every child so they have access to the public education that they are entitled to in this country. And I think that is shameful. I think it's shameful on all of us, and I own it. One of my lessons during this time is I wish I had pushed harder before this ever happened to make sure that every one of my children in Highline was connected. And so I own that, but now as a nation, we need to own that. And frankly, if in the shadow of Microsoft and Amazon and all of these wonderful companies in the Puget Sound area, we can't figure out a solution for this, then double shame on us. So that's the second thing. I think the third thing is around making sure that our children and families are fed. I'm not sure that people in general understand that while yes, we can provide meals to children who qualify, they do have to sign up, but those meals are only for our students. We can't provide meals to families. We're not funded for that. So the need to make sure that we are addressing food insecurity in our communities is huge right now. It is absolutely huge. And the other thing is that over the summer, we were able to provide 7 days worth of meals to any child who showed up. That is not the way the federal rules work once school starts. I am now bound to only provide meals 5 days a week to Highline schools enrolled students in my district. So we are going to have incredibly increasing levels of food insecurity in our community. And the third thing is healthcare access. You know, the positive test case rates are so much higher in my district, in SeaTac, in White Center, in Burien, than in other places in King County. And up until about a week ago, there were no testing sites down here. None. That is wrong. And so I really think that it is important that as we as school district leaders name all of the things that we need to do and are doing to make sure that our children get the high quality education they deserve, and that we are addressing these fundamental issues of equity, that as a broader community, society, and nation, we are looking at these issues around healthcare, around food insecurity, around broadband access, all of this. It's bigger than our schools. Our schools play a central role, probably more than anybody knew prior to this pandemic. But we really have to come together to come up with some long-term permanent solutions that do not rest on individual school districts to come up with on their own. And the last thing that I will say, because I know I'm getting a little hot and bothered over this, but clearly this is like what we're living right now. And, you know, my colleagues here, I know, are getting the same messages from families and students that are just heartbreaking in terms of the impact that all of these issues that I have listed are having on their lives. And the reality is that we are limited in what we can do to provide them. But the beauty of public education is that it draws amazing people into its ranks. And I know that every one of my colleagues on this screen right now and around the nation would tell you that we work alongside everyday heroes in our districts. And the things that our staff have done over the last several months and will continue to do to make sure that our children and families have what they need is truly inspiring to me and gives me hope, because one day this will be in our rearview mirror. What we have to do is be as smart and thoughtful right now to get through it, but also to make sure that we come out on the other side better.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Enfield. We have about 2 minutes before you all need to leave, and I think I have time for about one question here. And you've addressed so many topics that have been coming up in the Q&A and also in the chat, and I'll make sure that I send each of you the chat log as well as the Q&A log, so that way you can see what the questions are. This question is more of a technical question, which is, how will you meet the requirement for an average of 1,027 instructional hours this school year if you're offering fewer hours per day of online classes?
I'll take a stab at that, because we've been working closely on this issue and with the state board, and I really appreciate our State Board of Education. They passed this summer an emergency rule that allows the 1,027 hours to include remote learning, distance learning, home learning, under the direction of a teacher. So that allows us to, that's what's helping us with the remote learning. And thank goodness for the state board and their leadership. We're still gonna have to do daily attendance, but we're gonna be providing our kids, I know, opportunities for more than the 1,027 hours, but that is really, really going to help us. It's a great question, but it's only for 1 year to hopefully get through this. But that's my answer to that. There may be other better answers.
And would anyone else like to address that in our last minute here? Okay. Well, with that, thank you, Highline Superintendent Dr. Susan Enfield, Kent Superintendent Dr. Calvin Watts, Northshore Superintendent Dr. Michelle Reid, Bellingham Superintendent Dr. Greg Baker, Kennewick Superintendent Dr. Traci Pierce, and Davenport Superintendent Jim Kowalkowski. And thank you to all of you for participating and submitting questions. If your question was not answered, superintendents, would it be okay if I share your email addresses that are found on your district websites?
No, give mine to Calvin.
All right, I will do that, and I will provide that in the webinar follow-up email, which you'll receive in about 24 hours. Also, Highline Superintendent Dr. Susan Enfield, she referred to this, but she wrote a blog for the League of Education Voters website for her process in starting the 2020-21 school year, which you can find at educationvoters.org, and I'll include a link to that as well. Dr. Baker, Dr. Enfield, Dr. Reid, Dr. Watts, Dr. Pierce, and Superintendent Kowalkowski, I'm going to let you go. Thank you again for all you do for Washington students. I'll close out the webinar after you go. Again, may your school year go well, and please reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to help.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. We know that these have been extraordinary times, and school this fall is not going to simply go back to the way it was. This creates enormous challenges for parents and families across our state. Many school leaders are doing their best to find solutions that are innovative, allowing learning to continue while maintaining safety for kids and teachers. We would love to hear from you. Is your school trying something innovative that others could learn from this fall? Did your district involve you in creating the solution? What are your hopes and dreams for the coming year? Send us your thoughts. Things that are working or things that you wish someone could try in the coming year as we grapple with this. We're collecting your ideas so everyone will be able to learn from each other. And we would love to shine a light on success stories out there. Send ideas to info@educationvoters.org. Our next LEVinar is Wednesday, September 2nd. Washington State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Rakedahl, will outline the current status of our schools as the 2020-21 school year gets underway, and will answer your questions. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, and clicking on Events, then Lunchtime Webinars. I'll also send registration information in the follow-up email. And on October 8th, please join us for a statewide virtual free convening around racial equity and education. First, we'll hear from Dr. Benjamin Danielson, Director of the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic at Seattle Children's, exploring the role of racial diversity, equity, access, and inclusion in our public education system. Then join us as we break into groups to discuss the issue together. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to me, Eric, A-R-I-K, @educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation with closed caption capability will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and will be sent to you in the follow-up email. Please feel free to share the recording with your friends and colleagues. If you would like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each one of us has the right to feel safe and valued. Together, we will fight for a world in which true educational and economic equity exists. We look forward to seeing you at future LEVinars.